Welcome back. Today I'm getting ready for an event in the city, and I thought I would do kind of a chit chat, get ready with me, and just talk about some questions you guys have asked about nursing on Instagram, as well as why I decided to leave. This video is going to be more of a chit chat, so I'm not going to exactly share every product that I use because there's going to be more talking going on, I guess, but I'll have everything linked below in case you want to know what I'm using. So one of the first questions, and I get asked this pretty often, is if I quit. And I did go per diem first. I did that for about maybe 6 months or so, and then I ended up quitting last summer, so around July. I think June 30th was my last day. So I did, and it's not really one reason why I did. There is one main reason that really pushed me over the edge, if you will, but it's like everything in life, it's a few different things, So a little backstory why I became a nurse in the first place. So I think I've mentioned this before, pretty sure, but I was originally in college for a couple things. I did biology, health sciences, basically. My original plan was to go into the medical field, but not as a nurse. I was thinking maybe PA or something like that. But anyways, when I was a sophomore, I had to drop out because I was pregnant, and after my sophomore year. So in between sophomore and junior year, I dropped out. And my mom is a nurse. She was an LPN and then she became an RN. So she's been a nurse for like pretty much her whole life. So she thought that it would be something that I can do a lot quicker. Specifically the LPN program, because she had done it and she did like a 9-month program, and that's pretty much the same one that I went into. So it was a 9-month program, and the reasoning behind it was basically it's a quick program. I can get a job, I'm gonna have a child so I can get a job pretty soon after. And I also picked the LPN because it was quicker and definitely a lot cheaper than the RN program, because I wasn't sure if that's what I really, really wanted to do. So that's the reason why I ended up in that program. And we can talk a little bit more about that later, but let's get into the reasons why I decided to quit. The first reason is something that I noticed very quickly after starting my job. I quickly realized that working in the medical field was not what I thought, and the patients did not necessarily come first. So let me explain what I mean by that. It was business first and everything second. And I get it. That is basically the model of pretty much every business or just institution. Personally, I feel like healthcare is one of those industries where that should not necessarily be the model, but unfortunately it is. And once I started to realize that, I no longer really wanted to be part of that system. If you work in the healthcare field, you probably know what I'm talking about, but all the issues that exist in healthcare are related to business. So like by business I mean like money. So issues like understaffing, patient overload, all those things are tied to that model. Just last month, or was it in December, I forget, there was like a big strike in the city with 6 different hospitals with a lot of those issues, and it all kind of ties in, you have this people on top making so much money. I mean, 8, 9, 10, 12 million dollars, and then when you look at what goes on the inside, it's like patients in the hallway. There's patients waiting months for appointments because there's no doctors, or there's just so much that can be done, but other things are the priority. Where I worked, there was a huge understaffing issue that eventually basically started to take a toll on me mentally, and I just started to realize it was not something that was gonna ever fully be solved. This is an issue that was institution wide, not necessarily just me. Obviously, it's not fair to the worker, but it's also not fair to the patient. It's kind of like you're cornered. There's not really much you can do because the issue exists all throughout these institutions, not just the one I worked at, like a lot of them, most of them that I've heard of. And then there's also the element of racism. So like you have certain departments where all the staff looks a certain way, and those will be like the better places to work, where maybe it's not as much overload or that situation. And it's very noticeable because we're talking about New York City, where there are plenty of brown and black people. With that being said, the population being taken care of is also pretty much a minority population in the inner city. And so one can assume that there's probably also an element of just not, you know, adequate or appropriate care, because the people on top who run these institutions, not all of them, but a lot of them, maybe there's like a couple people of color running stuff, but for the most part, it's not. So you have people who don't necessarily identify with the population, and I don't think that everyone who doesn't identify doesn't care, but I do think it plays a role, because you kind of can, if you can kind of see somebody as like your grandma or like your sister, or you know, I feel like you may have more compassion to that person than if you don't. And that's not always the case, but it can be the case for some people. We all know there are stereotypes about black people, for example, being able to deal with pain better, all that stuff. Like these are all things that still go on in the field. I'm the type of person that has a hard time being part of a system that I just feel like I have no control in the change of things that I think are an issue. It's also a lot of gaslighting, so it's not always as easy as you would think to even bring up those topics. There are many egos that you have to deal with. People have egos. People don't want to think that they are part of, you know, an issue. The second thing is that it started to affect me mentally and physically, and I didn't notice at first, but once I started to notice that I was being affected in those ways, I started to really think about my exit strategy. You know, like I'm like, I have to leave, even if it's temporary. Like I definitely need to like take a break or something, because I started to notice like, you know, it was really affecting me. This is something that many nurses go through, and you know, silently they don't really share, or maybe they do share, but what can you really do? Like you have to work, so it's hard to leave. And a lot of times these places give really good benefits, and it's hard to want to give up. It's hard to want to give that up. It was definitely one of the hardest things I've done, and it took a lot of bravery and faith, but I felt like I needed to. And it really, during the pandemic, was when I really like whoa, like I really need to find a way. Also, nurses get it from everywhere in healthcare, so like you're the person who kind of like is the point person to the doctor, also the point person to the patient, and everything kind of gets through, every issue, like everything gets passed through you. And I felt like the reward was not worth it, you know? So that's pretty much the second reason, I would say, like mental health and just, you know, choosing myself, choosing my sanity. Third reason is the biggest reason, and it kind of really sealed the deal for me, and that was my kids. So when I started my job, when I started my job, my daughter was 3 months old, and that is definitely one of the biggest regret that I've had in life so far, was basically starting that job when she was so young. I felt like I didn't have any time. I could not be a mom like the way I wanted to. And I'm not saying that you have to be there. Like that's if that's not what you want for yourself, that's fine, but that's what I wanted. But I ended up going through postpartum depression, not knowing that's what it was for years. I literally didn't realize until I realized. I didn't realize until I realized, basically. And I felt like it was taking up too much energy. I was doing a long commute, so I would leave the house before the kids woke up. I would get back home and it would literally be time for them to eat dinner, brush their teeth, and go to bed. Like, I just felt like I was in this cycle and time was passing by. Like, you know, my kids were growing up and I feel like I have no time with them. Like, I barely do on the weekends. We're running errands. Like, it's just like, I felt like this would have been my second biggest regret if I didn't make a change. These are years that I cannot get back. Like, you know, they grow so quickly and I just felt like I was missing all of it, you know, because I was either gonna be tired or commuting or at work. There's also a few questions that I've seen quite often, and one of them is if I would ever do an RN program. And I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but the main reason why I did the LPN program was because it was quicker, it was cheaper, and it would give me a taste for the field. So as you would imagine, I got a taste, and it's not something that I am thinking about doing. I really don't think it's for me, and I know there's so many different parts places, there's so many different things that you can do as a nurse, but I just don't think it's for me. And overall, I just would rather be in a different field. I'm not a person who ever says never. Like, I'm never gonna sit here and say, oh, I would never. So I'm not gonna say that, because you never know. But it's not something that's on my mind, and honestly, it hasn't been on my mind. It was on my mind initially, but things changed once I started to, you know, realize what it actually was. I also get asked a lot if I recommend the LPN program, or if I would recommend an RN program. So here's my take on it. I haven't shared why I did what I did. There's a few things I would say to consider. My situation was very specific to me, but generally speaking, I think if you know that's what you want to do, I would just do the RN program, because it's literally the same work in terms of the coursework. The 2-year program is going to be the same material as an LPN program. The difference comes in when you get a bachelor's. So if you're doing a 4-year program to get the bachelor's, and that's where the difference comes in. A lot of hospitals still hire with associates. I know people who got jobs literally last year with associates. A lot of hospitals still hire. They will want you to go back, obviously, and get your bachelor's, but you could always start, and then they will pay your bachelor's program for you, which is a good incentive. The reason why I say to do it, if you know that's what you want to do, is because it's the same work. You're literally doing the same work. It's the same textbook. It's the same exact thing. The difference comes into when you're practicing. So as an LPN, you can't do certain things, but you learn that stuff, at least in a lot of the programs. Like the one I went to, you learn the stuff, even though you cannot practice it. Even though you can't practice it, you still have to learn it. So if you can, I would say do that instead. In addition to the work being similar, if you're doing just a 2-year program, you also get paid more, and you have way more options for jobs. As I said earlier, there are a lot of egos in this industry, and there's definitely like a hierarchy. So you have a lot of people who are very disrespectful to people who they think are beneath them, which I know this exists in every industry, but I feel like healthcare is not the place for that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of it that goes on. I have witnessed doctors being very demeaning towards other staff, like people who are also providers, but maybe not a doctor, but also a provider, like a nurse practitioner, for example, and not be held responsible. Whereas that could never happen in the reverse. So there was definitely a sense of some people are more important than others. I hate these types of environments. I really, really do. And I think there's a place for that. It's just not in healthcare. It's every other industry, maybe. Like, Well, maybe not every other industry, but many other industries. Overall, I'm very grateful, and I will always be grateful for my time and my experience. I've met some amazing people. I've met some amazing coworkers, patients, and that was another thing that really started to get to me, was that a lot of the patients that I worked with, I kind of grew up with them because I started that job when I was like 23, I believe, and a lot of them were around that age, and we kind of, grew together. I left when I was 31. So we kind of grew together, and I started to really like know these people and know their lives, and just witnessing some of the unfair treatment they were receiving, I felt like was just witnessing some of the unfair treatment, like they would vent to me, and I felt like they're venting, but I can't, I hear you, but I literally cannot help you. I have been accused of picking sides by a doctor because like I said, a lot of the patients were minorities, black and brown, and like I understood where a patient was coming from on a certain situation. It was kind of like, oh no, like you're on their side and not on her side, not on the side of the department. And yeah. And this was not something that, in my opinion, was a side issue. This was basic, like, I couldn't tell you the specifics because I just can't, but I could not believe it. Also, I know some of you are in the healthcare field, and I don't say any of this to kind of like, just want to say like this is my experience, and these are my feelings, like it's not to say like don't do this, this is just my experience. Obviously, like everyone's experience is different. Basically, if somebody came and asked me what changes I would want to see in the healthcare industry, those are some of the changes I would want to see. Also, the insurance issue. Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother discussion, because part of my job, part of what I did was prior authorization. Basically, like if a patient was prescribed medication, I had to contact the insurance and have them pay for it, because a lot of times insurances don't want to pay for things. What's the point of you? That part was definitely not fun. Anyways, we are ready to leave the house. Well, I need to get dressed, but I will talk to you in my next video.